The turkey was the only thing in that house behaving exactly as I'd asked it to. 22 pounds, brined 2 days, basted every 40 minutes since 6 that morning, and it sat in the lower oven turning the color of a good autumn, while everything else around me went quietly, beautifully wrong. I remember thinking that, standing at the island in my mother-in-law's idea of my kitchen, peeling the skin off chestnuts with my thumbnail. At least the bird trusts me. It was the second Monday of October. Canadian Thanksgiving, the polite one, the dress rehearsal before the December chaos, and I had been rehearsing it for 3 years. 3 years since I'd left my job as a controller at a mid-sized firm on Bay Street. Left a corner office, a team of 9, a designation I'd studied 2 years past my undergrad to earn, because my husband had sat me down at a little table at a cafe on Yonge, and held my hands and told me the family needed me, not at the firm, at home, at his family's company. "Nobody understands money the way you do," he'd said, and I had been 31 and in love and stupid enough to think that was a compliment instead of a job description. So I ran the back office of his father's development company for nothing but the privilege of being family, and I hosted. God, did I host. Every holiday at our place in Rosedale, the narrow brick semi his parents had helped us buy, and never once let me forget they'd helped us buy. I learned which fork his mother judged you for, which casserole his aunt would refuse, and then complain wasn't offered. "The gravy's gone gray," his mother said from the doorway. She didn't come in. She never came into a kitchen she didn't intend to work in. "It's supposed to be golden. My mother's was always golden." "It's deglazed with the pan drippings," I said, not turning around. "It's exactly the color it's meant to be." "It looks like dishwater." A long sigh, the one I could have set my watch to. "I just don't understand the need to fuss with everything. A family meal isn't a competition." "No," I thought, scraping fond off the bottom of the roasting tray. "It's a performance and you've never once clapped." Out loud I said, "I'll keep that in mind." I wouldn't be keeping anything in mind. That thought arrived without permission and sat down in my chest like a house guest who wasn't leaving, and I didn't yet know why. I just knew it the way you know weather coming. There had been the new passcode on his phone, the one he'd changed the same week he'd told me. His face wasn't reading anymore, so he'd switched to numbers. There had been the line on the joint visa from a boutique on Ossington, twice, for things that never came home to me. There had been 3 months of late nights at an office I, of all people, knew did not require late nights, because I built the spreadsheets that ran it. My father-in-law shuffled in, ice clinking, and topped up his rye. He was a man who'd decided decades ago that silence was dignity. "Smells good in here," he said, which from him was practically a sonnet. He looked at the table through the doorway, the good china, the candles I'd bought because his mother thought tea lights were common. "You always do it right." Then something flickered behind his eyes, quick and almost apologetic, and he looked into his glass instead of at me. Lot of work, all this. I should have caught it. The apology in a man who never apologized. But my phone buzzed against the quartz, and it was my best friend, Joelle, who I'd known since residence at Western, the only person who told me 3 years ago that quitting was a mistake and then loved me anyway when I did it. "How's the firing squad?" she'd written. "Say the word and I'll text you a flat tire." I smiled, a real one the first all day, and thumbed back, standing by. "The gravy has been declared an act of treason." The front door opened on a gust of cold and a wall of perfume, and my sister-in-law swept in complaining about the 401, about the drive up from the city she made twice a year and treated like an expedition to the Arctic. Behind her came the cousins, the aunt, the uncle who only spoke to ask when we were eating. 9 for dinner. I'd cooked for 9. I'd done the math. I'd done the seating. I'd done the wine pairings nobody would notice. My husband came down last, in the navy sweater I'd bought him, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. He kissed my temple in front of his mother, the way he did when he wanted her to see him being a good husband, and his lips were cold, and I felt the houseguest in my chest stand up and start putting on its coat. We sat. I carved. Of course I carved. His father's hands weren't what they were, and his were apparently occupied being useless. I served everyone first, the way my own mom had taught me. Host eats last. And I was reaching for my own plate when my husband cleared his throat and stood and tapped his knife against his water glass like we were at a wedding. "Before we eat," he said, "I want to say something." His mother folded her hands. His sister got very interested in her napkin, and I understood, in the half-second before he said another word, that everyone at that table already knew what he was about to say. Everyone but me. The aunt was watching me the way you watch a car accident. The uncle for once had nothing to ask. I've thought about this a long time, my husband said to the room. Never to me. And I think we all know it hasn't been working for a while. I want a divorce. He reached into the breast pocket of the sweater I'd bought him and pulled out a folded envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, and set it on the table next to my untouched plate. The seal of a law firm in the corner. I've already moved my things to my parents, he said. You can have the house till the end of the month. My lawyer will call you tomorrow with the terms. They're fair, more than fair. Nobody gasped. That was the part I'd remember longest. Nobody at that table made a sound, because nobody at that table was surprised. They had passed the green beans I'd blanched and they had known. His mother lifted her wine and took a small, satisfied sip, like she'd been waiting 3 years for the curtain to finally come down on the show she'd never wanted to watch. I looked at the envelope, I looked at the turkey, perfect, golden 22 pounds of trust, and something in me that had been clenched for 3 years just let go, not into tears, into a kind of terrible clarity, cold and useful, the same clarity I used to get at quarter end, when the numbers didn't reconcile, and I had to find the lie in the ledger. I stood up. I picked up my plate, the empty one, and I set it gently on the sideboard. I untied the apron, my apron, the one I'd brought from my own mother's kitchen, not one of his mother's, and I folded it over the back of my chair. The bird needs another 20 minutes to rest, I said, to all of them, very calmly. And the gravy is exactly the color it's meant to be. I looked at his mother. You'll want to learn to make it. You'll be doing this next year. Then I walked out of my own dining room, took my coat and my purse and, because some animal part of me was already 3 moves ahead, my passport from the drawer in the front hall and the external hard drive from the office desk, the one with 3 years of the company's books on it, and I got in my car and I drove. I did not go far at first. I sat in the Tim Hortons parking lot on the corner of Mount Pleasant, with the engine running and the heat on, and I shook for about 10 minutes, the way you shake after you've nearly hit a deer. And then I called Joelle, and when she answered laughing, expecting the flat tire bit, I said, he did it, at the table, with the papers. The laughter stopped. He served you on Thanksgiving with papers. His lawyer brought them, or, he had them in his pocket. The whole dinner he had them in his pocket. Where are you right now? Timmy's on Mount Pleasant. Do not go home, she said, and I heard her already moving, keys, a door. Do not sign anything, do not call his lawyer, do not pick up if any of them call. Where's your stuff, your real stuff, your papers? I have my passport. I have the company's books, I have my own laptop. I started to laugh and it came out wrong. I grabbed the hard drive, Joe. I don't even know why, I just took it. There was a pause. And then my best friend, who has always been smarter than me about people, the same way I've always been smarter than her about money, said slowly, you took the hard drive with all of the family company's books on it. The company you've been telling me for a year is bleeding cash and won't tell you why. Another pause. Stay there. I'm calling my sister. Her sister and I had met maybe 4 times at Joelle's things. A birthday, a baby shower, a New Year's. She's a family lawyer in Toronto, the kind who does the unglamorous trench work of divorces, where there's a business in the mix and somebody's hiding something. Her name is Beatrice, and she has the warmest phone voice and the coldest courtroom one of anybody I've ever met. And an hour later, I was sitting in her kitchen in the annex with a mug of tea I didn't drink, telling her everything in the flat, dead voice of someone reading a deposition. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she said, First, the good news, and you're not going to feel like it's good news, but it is. He cannot put you out of that house at the end of the month. In Ontario, the matrimonial home is special. You both have an equal right to possession, regardless of whose name is on title, regardless of who moved out. He told you that to scare you into thinking fast and signing fast. It's a bluff. A nasty one, but a bluff. Okay, I said. Second, did you delete anything? Texts, voicemails, emails, anything from him or his family? No, I never delete anything. 12 years of accounting will do that to a person. Don't start now. Whatever they send you in the next while, calls, texts, all of it, you keep every single piece. People who pull a stunt like this almost always overplay it in the next 48 hours, and they hand you your case for free. She tapped the table once. Third, and I want you to really hear me. The timing of this is wrong. Men leave at Thanksgiving. Fine, men are cowards on a schedule. But you don't serve papers you've had drawn up by a firm, with a moved-out apartment and a 1-month clock. Unless there's a deadline you're not telling your wife about. Somebody is in a hurry. I want to know why he's in a hurry. And that was the moment, sitting in a stranger's bright kitchen at 10 at night, that the controller in me woke all the way up. Because I knew exactly who was always in a hurry about money. I'd watched him be in a hurry for 2 years. My father-in-law, the refinancing, the bridge loans, he wouldn't let me see the paper on. The way the operating line at the company kept getting topped up, and the cash kept disappearing into client deposits and consulting, that I'd flagged 3 times and been told, gently, firmly, that some things were handled at the family level. His father's company is in trouble, I said. Real trouble. I've been saying it for a year and they've been managing me. And the only asset in this whole family that isn't already pledged to a bank, I stopped, is our house. And the cottage. Beatrice went very still. Tell me about the cottage. It had been my grandmother's. A little white frame place on a lake up in Muskoka, the kind of place that's worth an obscene amount now, not because anyone built anything fancy, but because some hedge fund manager, 3 docks over, paid $4 million for a teardown and dragged the whole shoreline up with him. It had come to me free and clear when my grandmother died. It was on paper, in my name alone, and it was worth more than the house in the city. And it was the one thing in the marriage that was unambiguously, legally, only mine. He's been after me to put it in both our names, I said slowly, for 2 years, for estate planning. So it's simpler if anything happens. His mother brings it up at every single holiday. It's such a shame it just sits there in your name, dear, like you don't trust the family. Beatrice wrote something down. And if your marriage ends before that happens, the cottage stays yours. But if the company is about to go under, and a lender or a court or the OSC starts looking for assets to satisfy what's owed, then the fastest way to get a piece of it, I said, and my voice had gone strange and quiet, is for him to be married to me when the music stops, with a claim on the matrimonial home, and a wife too rattled to fight for the rest. Or, I felt sick, or to scare me into a settlement that hands it over to make him go away. He's not divorcing you because he fell out of love, Beatrice said gently. He's divorcing you on a deadline. Somebody's set that deadline. I think you already know who. The calls started that night. The first voicemail was at 11:40, my husband, his voice doing the wounded reasonable thing he was so good at. He hoped I'd gotten home safe. He thought it would be best if we kept this civil and quick. His lawyer would call. We could do this like adults. The second was at 12:15, his mother. I could hear the dinner party still going behind her, somebody laughing. She wanted me to know that she understood I was emotional, but that dragging things out would only embarrass everyone, and that the family had always been so generous with me, and didn't I want to leave with my dignity? The word dignity in her mouth sounded like a threat. By morning there were 9. By the second day there were over 30. My husband, his mother, his sister, even his father once, his father's voice low and uncomfortable, asking me to just give him a call so we can sort the cottage paperwork. Before the end of the week, there's no rush, but sooner's better. Before the end of the week. There it was. The deadline said out loud, by the man who'd said it. I didn't pick up a single one. I let every call go to voicemail, and I saved every voicemail, and I screenshotted every text, time-stamped, and I emailed the whole bundle to Beatrice, and to myself, and to a folder I named, with what I think was the first genuine flash of pleasure I'd felt in days: reconciliation. Because here is the thing my husband forgot. In 3 years of telling everyone I'd given up my career to find myself, I didn't find myself. I was never lost. I'd just been doing his family's bookkeeping for free, which meant I knew where every body was buried, because I was the one who'd been told, repeatedly, not to dig. So I dug. I plugged in the hard drive on Beatrice's recommendation, under the supervision of a forensic accountant she trusted, so the chain of it would hold up. A sharp, dry woman who came to the annex kitchen with 2 laptops and the manner of a surgeon. And over 4 days the 3 of us put together, line by line, the thing I'd been seeing the shadow of for 2 years and been forbidden to look at directly. The company was hollow. My father-in-law had been moving money out of it for the better part of 3 years, fake consulting fees to a numbered company that the forensic accountant traced, in about 90 minutes, back to a cousin. Client deposits that were really loans being shuffled to cover other loans, a second mortgage taken out against a property the company didn't outright own. There was a flag on file with the regulator. There was a lender about to call a loan. And there, in an email chain I'd been blind copied on once, 11 months ago, and never been meant to read closely, was a line from the company's outside counsel to my father-in-law. Re your question, yes, a spouse's separately held real property is generally protected, but exposure changes considerably depending on marital status and timing. Happy to discuss strategy. Timing, marital status, strategy. I sat back from the laptop and I felt the last warm thing in me go cold and clean. They didn't just stop loving me, I said to Beatrice. They ran the numbers on me. I was a line item. I was the asset they couldn't unlock. Yes, she said, and now you have the ledger. I'd love to tell you. The next 8 months were dramatic. They weren't, mostly. They were paper. They were boxes of documents, and Beatrice's careful, unhurried letters that made my husband's expensive lawyer's letters look like the bluster they were. They were me, going back to work. My old firm took me back inside 3 weeks. My old boss telling me on the phone that she'd never understood why I left and was furious to learn the reason. And discovering that the part of me I'd been told I'd lost had been sitting there the entire time, sharp as ever, just waiting for someone to stop telling it to be quiet. His side tried everything. They tried the affair, which turned out to be exactly what it looked like, a girl in the leasing office 26 years old who I felt nothing for but a tired sort of pity. Because she had no idea she was set dressing. They tried claiming I'd abandoned the home. They tried claiming the cottage was a family asset because we'd spent summers there, as if a few barbecues could launder my grandmother's deed into community property. Beatrice took each one apart so calmly it was almost boring to watch. And then, near the end, it stopped being boring. Because when their financial disclosure came in, it didn't match. The company's books they swore to didn't match the books I'd had on a hard drive in my front hall desk for 2 years. And Beatrice, who had been waiting for exactly this, asked the court for the forensic accountant to take the stand and asked my old boss to come and explain, under oath, what kind of professional I'd actually been before I'd been talked into disappearing, and that was bad enough for them. But the thing that ended it, the thing I will remember when I am old, was the woman who'd been my father-in-law's office manager for 16 years, a quiet woman near retirement who'd always been kind to me in the small invisible ways that kept that company running, refilling the coffee, remembering my birthday when no one else did. Beatrice put her on the stand, and his lawyer objected himself hoarse, and the judge, a sharp, unimpressed woman who had clearly seen 100 men try this exact thing, allowed it. In the autumn, before that Thanksgiving, Beatrice asked her, "Did you have occasion to overhear a conversation between your employer and his son?" And the office manager, who would not look at the family bench, said yes. She said the intercom on the conference room phone had been left on by accident, the way it sometimes was, and she'd heard my father-in-law say it. She repeated it for the court in a flat, frightened, honest voice. The lender's calling the loan by year-end. The only clean asset is the cottage, and it's in her name. You need to end it, and you need to do it so fast and so ugly she can't think straight. Serve her at the dinner. Get her upset. Get her to sign before she gets a lawyer. And my husband's answer, which she repeated too. I'm handling it. The girl from leasing gives me cover. She'll be too humiliated to fight. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the heating ticking in the walls. His mother made a small sound, like a hinge. My husband put his face in his hands, and I didn't feel triumphant, not the way you'd think. I felt the way you feel when a tumor you've been told for years is probably nothing, finally shows up on the scan, and a doctor finally says the word out loud. Relief and grief, all at once, that I hadn't been crazy. That I'd been right, that the people who'd spent 3 years telling me I imagined things had been the ones constructing the thing I was imagining. It didn't go to a verdict, it never does, once it's that lopsided. Their lawyer asked for a recess and came back wanting to settle, and the settlement was not fair, more than fair. The cottage stayed mine, untouched, never theirs to begin with. The house in the city was sold and split, and my half came out larger than his because of what the disclosure had finally surfaced. The regulator, who'd already been circling the company, did what regulators do once a court record hands them a map. My father-in-law avoided jail but not the fines that took the house in Rosedale he'd lorded over me, and the company that had been the family's whole identity was sold off for parts to a competitor who didn't even keep the name. My husband moved out west, Calgary last I heard, trying to start something with what was left, which was not much. His sister, who had folded her napkin so primly while her brother served me papers, ended up doing PR for a condo developer and renting a basement in a part of town her mother would have died before admitting existed. And his mother. His mother wrote me a letter a year on, almost to the day. I'll tell you about that, because of where I was when it came. A year after that Thanksgiving, I was standing in a rented hall in a community center in the East End. Not a gala, not the Met, nothing glittering, a community center with good kitchen and a leaky coat closet. At the launch of a small thing I'd started with my settlement and a lot of help from Beatrice and Joelle. It's not a foundation, exactly. It's plainer than that. It's a fund and a free legal clinic for women who are leaving marriages where the money was the cage. Women who got talked out of their careers and into invisibility. Women who can't prove what they know because they were never allowed near the books. I called it the open ledger because the whole thing my husband's family did to me only worked in the dark, and the cure for it is light. I was standing by the coffee, real coffee in a real urn, none of his mother's china. When a woman I'd helped a few months before came up to me, holding her toddler on her hip, and told me, with her chin up and her voice shaking, that her papers were being served next week by her lawyer on her terms and that she'd done it with her bank statements organized in a binder because of something I'd said. And I took her free hand in both of mine and told her she'd done the hard part herself, that we were just the backup, and I meant every word, and the circle of the whole rotten year closed over so gently I almost didn't feel it. That was when Beatrice handed me the letter. It had come to the clinic, of all places, in his mother's spidery hand. I knew it before I read the return address. I almost didn't open it. But I did, standing there in my coat by the leaky closet, and it was not an apology. His mother was incapable of an apology, the way some people are incapable of carrying a tune, but it was, in its way, a surrender. She wrote that she was not asking for forgiveness and did not expect it. She wrote that she had spent a lifetime holding a family together by holding her tongue and her nose, and that it had rotted from the inside while she polished the silver on top. She wrote that she had looked at me 3 years ago and seen something soft, something she mistook for weak, and that she had encouraged her son to simplify matters. And then she wrote the only line that has stayed with me word for word. I thought your kindness was a weakness. I have since had a great deal of time to understand that it was the only strength in the room. I read it twice. I folded it back into its envelope. Joelle, who had appeared at my elbow the way she always does, said, "Well?" Curse, plea, or a demand for the cottage. "White flag," I said. "General mother-in-law has left the field." "Good," she said, and she looped her arm through mine the way she's done since we were 19. "Now you can actually be finished. I want to tell you there's a man in this part, because there was eventually, and he's a good one, and he's nothing like the cold-lipped performance I married. He's the lawyer's law partner, of all the unlikely things, a man who spent a year quietly handing me coffees and arguing with me about the Leafs and never once making me feel like a case. And one cold night on a balcony with the city spread out below us he told me, in the most lawyerly possible way, that falling for someone you met through a high-conflict file was the single most professionally foolish thing he could do, and that he was going to do it anyway. But I won't make him the ending, because he isn't. He's a chapter in a book that's finally mine to write, and that's all he'd want to be. The ending is this. 2 weeks after the launch, I was back at the cottage, my grandmother's white frame place on the lake, mine, free and clear, the one they tried to take and couldn't. It was the second Monday of October. Thanksgiving, the polite one, come round again. But the table was the same wobbly pine one my grandmother had bought at a barn sale 40 years ago, and around it were the people I'd chosen. Joelle and her sister and the office manager who'd told the truth on the stand and become. Somehow my friend and the man who argues with me about hockey, and a few others who'd shown up the way real family does, with butter tarts and a casserole nobody asked for, and a 2-4 of something nobody needed. There was no head of the table. There was no seating plan. The turkey was 20 pounds, brined 2 days, and I'd cooked it the way I liked it, with the gravy exactly the color it was meant to be, and nobody at that table told me it looked like dishwater. They told me it looked like a feast. I stood up to say something, and I'm not a speech person, so I kept it short. I said that a year ago I'd given thanks for the truth, for finally knowing the shape of what it had done to me, and that I was still thankful for that, but that this year I was thankful for what comes after the truth, for quiet that isn't loneliness, for a table I built myself, in a house that was always mine, with people who show up with terrible wine and unconditional patience, for the strange grace of being underestimated by people who turned out not to matter, and for second acts For the courage, however you find it, to stand up from a table where you are only ever a line item and walk out and go set your own. They raised their glasses. The lake was doing the thing it does in October, going dark and silver and endless, and somewhere out there a loon called the way it has every fall of my life. And I sat back down and passed the gravy, and I thought about the woman I'd been a year before, basting a bird at 6 a.m. for people who'd already decided to sell her. I didn't hate her. I just didn't have to be her anymore. The turkey, I noticed, was perfectly moist. Not that it mattered. It could have been burnt toast, and it still would have been the best meal of my life, because every bite of it was finally, completely, only ours. The thing I keep coming back to a year on is the hard drive. I didn't grab it because I'm clever or brave. I grabbed it because some quiet, unglamorous habit in me. 12 years of never throwing away a receipt, never deleting a voicemail, never trusting a number I hadn't checked twice, moved my hand before my heart had caught up to what was happening at that table. And that small, almost boring instinct is the only reason the cottage is still mine. I've thought a lot about why it worked out the way it did, and I don't believe it was luck, and I don't believe it was fate. It was cause and effect, the way it always is. My husband and his father planned in the dark, and a thing planned in the dark only survives in the dark. The moment I stopped reacting and started keeping records, every call saved, every text screenshotted, that ledger I'd been forbidden to read, their whole plan became the evidence that buried them. They didn't lose because the universe is fair. They lost because they built something rotten and someone finally turned on a light. If there's anything I'd want my younger self to hear, the one basting a turkey at 6 a.m. for people who'd already decided to sell her, it's this. Be the kind of person who keeps her word and her receipts both, because a clear conscience and a clear paper trail are the two things no one can take from you in a courtroom. Stay sharp even when you're being told you're imagining things, especially then, because the people insisting you're confused are very often the ones counting on it. I spent 3 years being managed, and the cure wasn't anger, it was attention. I started looking again. I started asking the question Beatrice taught me to ask. Not how could he, but why now, why the hurry, who set the clock? And when the floor finally went out from under me, the thing that mattered most wasn't being right. It was being able to stand back up. I went back to work. I rebuilt. I sat in Beatrice's kitchen, and Joelle's spare room, and a courtroom, and a leaky community center coat closet. And I kept going on the days I wanted to lie down in the road, and that stubbornness, that plain refusal to stay knocked down, turned out to be worth more than the designation after my name ever was. I don't tell women who come to the open ledger to forgive. That's their business, not mine. I tell them to organize their bank statements and to remember that they are not as alone as the quiet has convinced them they are. I tell them that the kindness they were mocked for is not weakness. It's the steadiness that lets you walk away from a table where you're only a line item and go set your own. The loon still calls every October over that lake. I sit at my grandmother's wobbly pine table now, with people who showed up, and I'm not the woman who left that dining room a year ago. I just had to lose everything I thought was mine to find out what actually was.